Endurance Junkie Podcast, episode 95, brought to you by Health IQ, an insurance company that helps health-conscious people get special life insurance rates. Go to healthiq.com/junkie to support the show and learn more. Hey junkies, how are you doing? Thanks for joining me on a new episode of the Endurance Junkie Podcast, the show where I will be interviewing some of the fastest, smartest, and most inspiring people active in the endurance world today. Now before we get going, I would just quickly like to thank Health IQ for supporting. Now many people in the endurance community have had trouble with how much they pay for their life insurance. And despite their own health-conscious lifestyle, they might get penalized for family history and BMI and other stuff like that. Well, Health IQ is a company that has decided to change all that, and they will gladly offer you much sharper rates on your life insurance. So if you want to learn more and get a free quote, just head over to healthiq.com/junkie. That's healthiq.com/junkie to learn more and maybe save over $1,000 on your yearly premium. Alright, really excited about today's show. Adrian Ballinger is a big mountain climbing rock star who has 13 8,000 meter plus summits to his name, including 7 times Mt Everest. Last year, Adrian summited Everest without the use of supplemental oxygen, a feat that less than 200 people in the world have ever achieved. As the founder and the head guide of Alpenglow Expeditions, Adrian has been guiding full-time for 15 years and has led over 100 international climbing expeditions on 5 continents. So, hi Adrian, thanks for coming on the show. Can you start off by telling us a bit about yourself and your sporting background growing up and how you ended up in big mountain climbing?
Sure. Well, thanks for having me. My name's Adrian Ballinger, and I'm a big mountain climber and skier with a focus on really high altitude peaks. So I spend pretty much every spring and fall in the Himalaya. For the past 19 years, I've been going spring and fall to the Himalaya, sort of my second home outside of the United States. And, how I ended up with this focus, it's really been a wild path. I certainly never thought I would. I was a pretty average athlete as a kid, but I loved sports. I sort of played basketball for a long time, and then tennis was my main sport all the way through high school. And then I actually rode crew in university. I think that's where I probably learned how to suffer. And throughout all that time, I was rock climbing and skiing. I grew up, I was born in England, but I grew up in Massachusetts. So I spent a lot of time in what's called the White Mountains in New Hampshire. And that's where I started as sort of a teenager, going out and having these bigger mountain adventures, getting scared with my friends, even on these little peaks and hills. Sometimes things get serious up there. And I loved that sort of like focus and intensity and needing to take care of ourselves that happened in those mountains. So then, through university, I kept climbing. And when I finished university, I took a year off before I'd actually been accepted to medical school, which was always my parents' plan for me. So I took a year off to get climbing out of my system, and I climbed for 12 months all over the world. And at the end of that 12 months, I sort of knew that was the only thing I wanted to be doing. And so I kept at it. Actually, for those first few years, the way I made a living, I had some sponsors giving me gear and giving me a little bit of money. But for those first few years after university, I actually worked primarily as a mountain guide. So I went through and got my full IFMGA mountain guide certifications so I could work on rock, in alpine, and on ski terrain. And it was really through guiding that I traveled a lot, that I started climbing a lot in South America, and I started making my first trips to the Himalaya, to Nepal, and to Tibet. And then since then, the two have sort of paralleled. I still guide. I own a guide company called Alpenglow Expeditions. And when I can get out with other people and guiding, I do that. And then I'm also lucky enough to have really great sponsors now, so I can sort of support my own projects as well.
Yeah. Okay. So, where did that technical knowledge come from? Because you started maybe rock climbing or climbing indoors. So, what made you make that step to go outside and just tackle these big mountains?
Yeah, so actually, I started climbing in the early '90s, and there actually weren't a lot of climbing gyms at that point, and so I started outside. I went into gyms much later, but I actually started climbing outside through a family friend of mine. Sort of my best friend growing up, his name was Greg. His dad was sort of a good East Coast climber, and started taking his son and me out when I was about 12 years old. So that was my first introduction to it. And then really, I've just been incredibly lucky to have a series of mentors in my life. And that's kind of how our sport, big mountain climbing, really works. There's the guiding track where there's education and classes and exams. But for just becoming a competent climber, you just need to be outside and having experiences. And really, my main mentor when I went to university, we had an outdoors club, sort of an outdoor leadership club led by a well-known U.S. climber named Chris Warner, who climbed Everest and climbed K2. And he sort of had this job at Georgetown University where I went to do outdoor leadership. And so I just fell in with him and started interning with him right away. And he really helped me with those stepping stones. So I was a freshman in college, and he had a cancellation on a trip to Ecuador to climb 6,000-meter peak volcanoes. And he called me 3 days before Christmas and said, if you can leave on Christmas Eve, you can come and climb 3 6,000-meter peak volcanoes and learn all about crevasse rope work and cramponing and ice axe technique and all these different things. And I remember my parents just hated the idea. They thought it was risky and it was crazy to go away over the holidays and things like that. But I remember persuading them, this is something I'll never do again. Please give me the opportunity to go once. So I went on that trip, absolutely fell in love with it. And since that time, I've been back to Ecuador 35 times, guiding trips there. And obviously it led to a lot of these different bigger trips I've done since then.
Okay, so it's just a matter of you starting small and starting at these easier peaks and then working your way up, more difficult, higher each time, and then working your way up to what eventually led you to summit Everest.
Yeah, that's exactly right. What you described is the path I truly believe is the right path. There's unfortunately, as the sport grows, there's also a tendency for people to want to skip steps. So people, for instance, in my guiding company want to go straight to Everest or straight to a technical mountain like Ama de Blam without having put years in on 4,000-meter peaks like in the Alps, 5,000-meter peaks, 6,000-meter peaks. There has to be a progression because as you get onto the biggest mountains in the world like Everest, when things go wrong, they go wrong so quickly and so powerfully that if you don't have just years of skills to fall back on, it's very hard to sort of survive in those situations, and you end up very dependent on other people if you haven't built that experience yourself. A great example I can give you is in 2007, the first time I ever guided an 8,000-meter peak. I was on Cho-Oyu, which is the 6th tallest mountain in the world, and we're at a camp at about 24,000 feet. And an unexpected, unpredicted storm came in. Even with great weather forecasting, these big storms still can sort of develop very quickly. And we ended up losing all of our tents in the storm. So we had a group of 8 of us where tents were literally being ripped off around us by 100-mile-per-hour winds. And we had to survive the night without tents and get down off of this peak. And there's no technique to that. There's just sort of experience of knowing how to survive and keep doing the next right thing to get off the mountain in a big storm.
Yeah. So how do you maintain your composure then and your clarity during moments like that? Is that from purely experience then?
I'm not sure. I'd love to say I do, but I'm not sure I do. The reality is you just do what needs to be done. It's not necessarily pretty. It's not necessarily by a formula or anything like that. And I'm not sure I always have composure. But, I think the thing is that through my career, I've been going to the mountains for 30 years now, 27 years. And through that time, you deal with small situations all the time. And so you build sort of a comfort with knowing that if you just keep moving forward, if you just keep taking small steps, things will get better. The pain and suffering of whatever the situation is will eventually end. And that's certainly the only way I feel like I made my way up Everest. It's without supplemental oxygen. It's not that I'm think I'm a very talented athlete. It's that I believed that eventually the pain and suffering will end. Just kept taking small steps, and that's how it works on the big mountains. I think the other thing is really having teammates that you trust and that trust you and that you've built experience with, again, like built a trust with. When I've had really dangerous situations in the mountains, it's always been crucial to me that I've had partners that I can count on and vice versa.
Yeah. So there's like a sort of survival instinct that just kicks in.
Yeah, I think so. I'm sure we all have it. And the thing is, though, by these small steps that we're talking about, smaller peaks and then progressively bigger peaks and bigger peaks, you sort of hone that skill to be able to take care of yourself no matter how harsh the environment.
Yeah, okay. Now, besides another technical part of climbing, how about the physical part? I mean, how do you train for such a thing? You have to train for altitude. You have to be physically incredibly fit. How do you train for that?
Yeah, it's the first thing I think about is kind of like I was out all day today or all morning today training. So sort of up at 5 a.m. out in a snowstorm here in Lake Tahoe. I live in Lake Tahoe, California. We've been getting sort of a big wet storm. But my girlfriend, Emily Harrington, who's also a professional climber, and I were up at 5:30 out the door and in the mountains for, 7 hours training, working. Luckily, in the winter, training for us can be quite fun because we use primarily ski touring, backcountry skiing, so where we climb peaks and then ski back down them, which is a lot of fun. It's kind of a passion of mine. But the training for big mountains and for high altitude climbing is all about huge loads of low intensity work. So I work with a coach, a company called Uphill Athlete, based out of coaches are split between Colorado and Seattle. But my coach, Scott Johnston, used to coach Olympic Nordic skiers and now coaches primarily big mountain climbers, including myself and most of my best partners. And so he'll create a plan for me each week. But as I'm ramping up, like I'm going back to Everest this spring, so I'm sort of ramping up my training again. And so my training load is anywhere between 20 and 30 hours per week. And probably 70% of that is low intensity. So for me, that's heart rate below 145 beats per minute. And it's generally fasted training because it's so important that we're fat adapted in the mountains, that our bodies are burning our own internal fat stores versus carbohydrates or sugar that we're just putting in our mouths. And so that's sort of the main focus of my training. And then the other 30% is muscular endurance workouts where I'm actually trying to build power by carrying like a 30 kilo, 70 pound pack on my back and going up the steepest hill I can find for 1,000 meters. So that's sort of building muscle and power, and then a bit of core and things like that, just because the whole experience out in the big mountains is so uncomfortable that having sort of a strong core and lower back and things like that just keep you from getting hurt during these long expeditions.
Okay. So are you on a ketogenic diet then?
Yes, so it's a great question. So I go on and off of ketogenic. Okay. I'm always on, for the past year and a half, I've been on a carbohydrate restricted diet. And that was after going to a sports performance lab and doing a bunch of metabolic testing and actually finding how dependent on sugars I was and what a poor source of energy that is for a big mountain climber. And the biggest reasons for that, I think it can benefit a lot of endurance athletes, these carb-restricted diets and ketogenic diets, but especially the high altitude climbers above about 25,000 feet without oxygen. The human body just can't take in food anymore. So I used to be someone who was very dependent on eating sugar every 30 minutes or every 45 minutes, like goos or shot blocks or things like that, candy bars even. And once you get above 25,000 feet, your body rejects anything you put in your stomach. You just vomit it back out because it's shut down your digestive system due to a lack of oxygen. And so at that point, you're dependent on what your body has internally. And if your body's not used to burning fat stores, you end up having basically massive bonks. You hit a wall that you really can't get through. And that's what happened in 2016, the first time I tried without oxygen. I ended up failing in 2016 on Everest without oxygen, turning around at about 28,500 feet because I had been, uncontrollably shivering for about 5 hours, really cold, not able to rewarm my body. And so due to that, a lot of this dietary stuff and the testing I did at the UC Davis Sports Performance Lab was sort of trying to figure out what that failure was that I had had in 2016. And yeah, so to answer your question, so I'll go on to full ketogenic diets where I'm shooting for my carbohydrates to be at around 10%. So 60% fats, 30% protein, 10% carbs, but it's very hard to hold, and I'm not sure you'd want to hold it full time. So I'll do that for a month or two, couple of months, and then I'll come back off some more like 25% carbohydrates. And my body seems really happy at that 20 to 25% carb level.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, that makes sense. You know, you can get off and relax a bit and just have that slice of pizza from time to time and not feel guilty about it. That's a good idea. Maybe I should do that like that as well. So yeah, now Everest, what's it like being on the summit? I mean, it's got to be an incredible feeling.
Yeah, I mean, Mount Everest is this incredibly important place for me. I'm lucky enough that this spring will be my 11th season on the mountain. So for the past 10 years, I've gone to Mount Everest, both guiding other people to the summit while using supplemental oxygen, and then also doing these personal projects like trying to climb without supplemental oxygen. So I've summited 7 times over the past 10 years. And, so what it's like, it's kind of like the best and worst of the world in many ways. I sort of see it as like almost like a laboratory for everything else in life, because the experience is so concentrated. You've got a few hundred people on the mountain. You've got a team of probably 15 or 20 people. The experience is a couple of months long. The danger and risk is very real. 10 to 12 people a year die on the mountain. In bad years, it's 20 people. In good years, it's 8 people. But that means if there's 500 people on the mountain, you're going to know those people who are dying on the mountain around you. And so it maintains a very close focus and forces sort of a teamwork approach to the mountain. And yet at the same time, each person who's there has these very clear personal selfish goals of summiting the mountain. So it's very personal, and yet the team is important as well. And I love the interplay of those two things. And I love seeing people push themselves to their absolute limits physically and mentally and emotionally. I think one of the big differences between like what I've seen in ultra running, for instance, I've done some long running races or Ironman triathlons and things like that. If things go horribly wrong, you can always sort of DQ, DNF, do not finish, and find an aid station and get help. In the big mountains, there's kind of no out like that. If you take things too far, the consequences are very serious. And so that sort of focus and reality and how people have to work through that risk, as well as the pain and suffering of the physical piece, I find fascinating. Every year is so different, and I just keep wanting to go back and see more.
Yeah. And the fact that you summited 6 times with oxygen, 1 time without oxygen, did that feel different to you? Were you mentally as fit without oxygen than with oxygen?
No, I mean, it's a great question. So no, they're 2 completely different things, even though I value both very much. Like climbing with oxygen is difficult, it's challenging, pushes people, but it means that theoretically a non-full-time professional climber can summit Mount Everest. We take climbers who have built the experience and trained very hard, but they're not full-time professional athletes, and they can stand on top. Without supplemental oxygen, I'm not sure there's been a non-full-time professional athlete who's done that yet. It is a whole nother level of difficulty. Oxygen is essentially it's essentially a form of doping, right? It makes the mountain easier than it would be without. It's an enhancement to our bodies. So all of my guiding, the 8 years that I was guiding on the mountain, all of them were with supplemental oxygen, because you need to be making decisions for other people and you need to have the energy available to help with a rescue if something goes wrong. That's my job. And trying without supplemental oxygen, there was no way I could help anyone else on the mountain. And in fact, it was hard for me to get back down myself. And I was surrounded by people on supplemental oxygen, both my Sherpa teammates and my partner on the mountain, Corey Richards. They had supplemental oxygen and were able to helped me. The biggest thing they helped me with was on the descent off the mountain. Our final summit push ended up being 43 hours long. And so 43 hours up and down. And on the way down, just below the summit of the mountain, so at essentially 29,000 feet, 8,800 meters, I was falling asleep. So if I had to wait 30 seconds for a rope to abseil, I'd just fall asleep standing up. And I'd like to believe that I would wake myself back up, but I was awful glad that I had people standing next to me to kick me or elbow me and keep me moving, because my mental acuity, it was gone up there. I don't remember more than half of that summit day. I was lucky enough to have a filmmaker with me filming. And so, when someone said, oh, we had this conversation at 28,500 feet, and I'd be like, we didn't have that conversation. There's no way that happened. And then I could look at the footage and see these things that I just have no memory of.
Wow, it's crazy. So how did you recover from such a feat then? Does it take a couple of months or something?
I mean, overall, I'd say I'm still recovering. I probably lost 15% of my body weight while on the mountain doing that, because we spent 4 weeks, we spent just over a month above 21,000 feet or above 6,300 meters. And just spending that much time up high, our bodies are probably burning up to 8,000 calories a day, and we're probably putting in 2,000 calories a day. So you just lose a lot physically, as well as sort of that mental exhaustion of feeling that risk or hazard that happens up high. So, I summited without oxygen on May 27th this year, and came home and pretty much spent the whole summer recovering. That was at home, as well as I spent a month in Peru. I spent a bunch of time on the beach. I spent a bunch of time eating a lot, and then slowly breaking back into my workout routine, but working out just at much lower distances. So in the summer, I primarily trail run, and just cutting my distances way back. I remember those first few weeks when I got home, going for a 3-mile run in the hills was exhausting. And I was probably sleeping at least 11 hours a night, sometimes more, whereas my average is 7 hours a night. Mm-hmm. But my body was just demanding rest so strongly.
Mm-hmm. So what keeps you motivated to keep pushing your body like that, like season after season after season?
Yeah, that's a great question. I guess just feeling like I can still, I do still have this capability. I actually don't feel like I've peaked in my climbing career yet. And because I'm still, one of the beauties of high altitude climbing is so much of it is about experience and understanding your body and how to just get a little more efficiency out of each day, so you use a little less energy and have a little more at that final summit push. And that sort of benefit or is sort of a strength of people as they get a little more older and more experienced. And so I still feel like I can achieve more, and I just love like having these big audacious goals that I really don't know if I can succeed at. I probably fail on more than 50% of the big mountains I try to climb or ski. Definitely more than 50% I fail at. Mm-hmm. And I like the unknown of that. It's so different than a lot of the rest of life. For me, I'm lucky enough to be quite comfortable when I'm at home. And in order to appreciate that comfort, I sort of need those big unknowns and that fear and risk.
Okay. So yeah, you talk about that you haven't peaked yet in your climbing career. So what is it that you want to achieve?
So many things. One thing I can tell you, I'll never climb Everest without oxygen again. It really did feel that sort of dangerous. There was that much risk involved that it wouldn't be worth it for me to do it again on the same mountain. So there's that. So like I told you, I'll go back to Everest this spring, but I'll actually be guiding. Mm-hmm. And I have a team of climbers that I've been working with for a few years that are very, very strong athletes. And so we're going back and trying to climb Cho-Yu, the 6th tallest mountain in the world, and Everest back to back in less than a month. Okay. When traditionally these expeditions are 2 months long just for one peak. So, things like that excite me. So guiding still excites me. But probably the thing that I'm most driven to right now is there's still a number of the 8,000 meter peaks. So there's 14 8,000 meter peaks in the world, peaks above that altitude. And there's a number of them that have not been skied from their summits yet. I think 5 of them have not been skied from their summits. And trying to ski these big peaks sort of combines my ability and experience at high altitude with my true total passion, which is skiing. And so this fall, this autumn, my girlfriend Emily, myself, and 2 of our partners, Hillary O'Neill and Jim Morrison, are all going to try to ski the 4th tallest mountain in the world, which is called Lhotse, and has perhaps the most iconic ski line anywhere on the planet. It's a cool wall that goes straight from the very top of the peak and just shoots straight down the first 1,500 meters, 4,000 feet or so through a rock pyramid, and then opens up onto the Lhotse face, which is another 4,000 feet of 40-degree plus steep open face. I've tried it once before in 2013, and the line was too icy, and I ended up summiting the peak, but skiing almost none of it. So we're going back this autumn to try again. Trying to ski big 8,000 meter peaks is kind of where my drive is right now.
Okay, that's more important than summiting all 14 8,000 plus peaks?
It definitely is for me. So I've summited 8,000 meter peaks 14 times now, but not all 14, obviously. I've done multiple ascents on some of them. But for me, the list of the 14 8,000 meter peaks doesn't inspire me. That's not to say it's not an amazing achievement. And, I have a number of friends who are either trying to do it or have done it. And it's an incredible thing to sort of focus a life around. But for me, I prefer like sort of individual inspiration. So this line on Lhotse inspires me so much. That's why I want to go and ski it. I certainly do want to try a route on K2 at some point, the 2nd tallest mountain on the planet, primarily because I want to spend time in that part of the world. I haven't been to the Karakoram yet, the mountain range that K2 sits in, and I really, really want to. And so that inspires me. But doing all 14 is my goal.
Yeah, okay, cool stuff. You're also working on a book. What do you want to achieve with that? Because it's not just a climbing book, right?
Yeah, no, so the working title is Why Everest Matters, Lessons Learned on the Roof of the World. For me, Everest was a dream of mine since I was 14 years old. I was this kid that sort of was playing in the hills of New England, and I started reading literature around mountaineering, and I sort of fell into reading all the books about Everest, everything I could find, especially like Messner and those early no-oxygen ascents. And, people trying new routes on the tallest mountain in the world and what that took and the level of risk they took. And so Everest was a dream of mine since I was that young, but it took me until I was 30 years old to go to the mountain for the first time. It's just not an easy mountain to figure out a way to go to. Either you need the money to go, and it's a very expensive trip to go as a client, or I had to become a guide or a professional athlete that people wanted to pay me to go. And it took so many years of climbing to sort of get to that position. And then, like I said, I've spent the last 10 years on the mountain every spring, and so many things have happened to be on the mountain that have shaped me. I've lost one of my close friends on the mountain, with me while climbing. I've had a business relationship sort of explode there. I met my girlfriend, Emily Harrington, at Camp 2 on the mountain while doing a rescue of another friend of ours. I've seen, been almost killed by avalanches on the mountain. And yet I've also had these incredible highs of summiting with people who never thought they could stand there, or spending one summit I got to spend over an hour just sitting on top alone while waiting for my team, and having this truly cathartic moment of my life of having that time there. And so the mountain has been so special to me, and I think there's so much misunderstanding around the mountain. There's so much negative press about what happens up there as well as positive. And so I want to share my sort of stories, like what's happened there on the mountain that makes it so important to me, and that I've been able to bring back and sort of see form who I am today. That's my goal.
All right. So when does it due?
Good question. In a perfect world, next Everest season. So in time for publication in 2019.
Okay.
it turns out writing a book is kind of like climbing Everest. It's hard.
And it takes a lot of time. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure if you've written books or other things, but just there's so many things I love doing in my life, whether it's skiing or traveling or rock climbing. And I also run a business, Alpenglow Expeditions, this guide company that I'm really proud of and that's growing. And so the discipline it takes to set aside a couple of hours a day and write, I have my good moments and my bad moments. So
okay.
Working on it.
Well, I'm definitely looking forward to the book. I mean, if it's out, I'm definitely going to order a copy. I've read some books on the mountain, and especially about that catastrophic '96 season there, with a lot of people died, and some amazing books and some amazing stories there. So hopefully this is a bit more positive and puts the mountain in a different perspective.
Absolutely.
What do you see as your biggest achievement in your career, and what do you see as your biggest regret or your biggest disappointment?
Oh, that's a great question. Biggest achievement specifically in sort of like big mountain climbing has to be summiting Everest without oxygen this spring. It's taken me years to get to the point to be ready to try it. And then it took me 2 seasons to actually achieve it. And the first season was a really hard failure and felt quite dangerous. And then the second season, this past spring, summiting, if the mountain had been 20 meters higher, I don't think I would have achieved it. It was that close for me. And getting down off the mountain was so hard for me. It's something I'm incredibly proud of, but it was really difficult, and I was very much dependent on my team as well as my own ability. So I'd say that's my greatest achievement up to this point. And greatest regret, I have lots of regrets from the mountain, but from the mountains, but I try to think of them, as sort of like learnings as much as possible, taking as much learning as I can out of them. But I think the one thing that jumped right into my head was actually the first fatality I had in the mountains was my co-guide. So the person guiding with me, I was 24 years old in Nepal, and we're actually on a non-technical trip, but we had to cross a glaciated pass. And at about 5,600 meters, we had a storm coming and a whole series of things happened. My partner ended up unclipping from the anchor we were working off to try to work more quickly. And one crampon, or the spikes on one foot, caught the pants of his other leg, and he ended up falling less than 6 feet from me and being killed in the fall. And, looking back at it, it was sort of this very fundamental learning moment for me as a guide and as a climber, and recognizing no matter how good we are, this was a super talented climber and guide, and yet these accidents can still happen. Like, I took a lot of learning from it, but looking back on it, I absolutely regret the series of steps we took that put us in the position in the first place. Looking back at it now as a guide with 20 years of experience, I never would have made the decisions that we made that day of sort of trying to go even though there was a storm coming, and pushing on even though we had clients that were too slow and we knew we were going to get benighted, and then being forced into this real rush and taking our own safety out of the system in order to try to achieve something. Looking back at it, it's a regret, because I could see all the red flags where we should have stopped and we didn't stop.
Yeah. How do you deal with moments like that? I mean, you've lost a couple of friends, you said. Doesn't that never affect you and your mindset about climbing? Still wanting to take those risks?
It absolutely affects me, and it's something my girlfriend Emily and I talk about it a lot, and with my close climbing partners, we talk about it a lot. Like, I constantly am sort of searching for, is it still worth it? Like we were talking before, that physically I know I can still do more and actually I think achieve even more, but the risk and sort of the buildup of losing friends over the years, and recognizing how much is still out of our control, even when we're very, very good at what we do. Mm-hmm. I'm much more conscious now before I decide to go on another big expedition. So, for instance, after summiting Everest this spring, I was asked onto another expedition this fall. There would have been another high-risk, high-end expedition, that I would have loved to go on, but I just felt like I hadn't yet sort of mentally recovered to be ready to take that risk again. And I think those spaces are just getting longer and longer. It has to be worth it. And it's one of the things I know some of your readers asked about, like, or listeners asked about, is Everest still dangerous? Even on my guided climbs, and we're one of, in my opinion, the best operators on the mountain, there's still risk we can't take out of the experience. And I think that's essential to what makes big mountain climbing special and important and different than other forms of athletic achievement. So I never want to take the risk out, but we have to have really hard conversations with our clients when we take non-professional climbers to the mountain to recognize that, yes, 10 people a year die on the mountain. No, we can't prevent those deaths or take away all the risk. And people will see bodies during their climbing on Mount Everest. So the risk is still absolutely there. And I think each of us just need to weigh whether it's worth it each time we go.
Oh, that's fascinating. I could continue talking to you for hours. I feel it's amazing. I find it a fascinating sport, and maybe we should book a second call in a couple of months or after your next your next expedition. But in the meantime, how can people get in touch with you if they want to, Adrian?
Yeah, great. So my guide company is alpenglowexpeditions.com. And, we're a guide company, even though we guide Mount Everest and really technical peaks like Ama de Blanc or Alpe Mayo, 70% of what we do is introductory level climbs around the world, sort of teaching people the basics to climb big peaks. So look us up if you're interested in getting outside and trying climbing, big mountain climbing. And then follow, you can always follow my sort of exploits. I primarily use Instagram. So at Adrian Ballinger on Instagram is a great way to find me.
All right, cool. Feel free to give some love to your sponsors and partners that you have.
Yeah, thanks. So, I mentioned at the beginning of the interview, that my sponsors are a huge part of how I get to do this, and I'm so lucky for that. So, really big one I'd love to shout out to, and who are also making, the nice thing is, great gear that I use in the mountains every day. Eddie Bauer for clothing and apparel, La Sportiva for boots, both big mountain climbing and rock climbing, and Blizzard and Technica for skis and ski boots.
All right, cool. I'll put those links up on the show notes page and all those links to the social media as well. I got one more question just to finish it off. If you could sit on a bench somewhere and chat for an hour with someone from the past or the present, who would it be?
Ooh, that is awesome. I love that. Because of my passion for Everest and how controlled Everest is today with all the technology we have in weather forecasting and things like that, I would love to sit down with, Hillary and his partner Tenzing Norgay and hear about those early climbs when it truly was about the unknown and exploration at a level that's hard to understand today.
Okay, well, you can book me a spot in that same bench and I'll be there. Thanks for your time, Adrian. Much appreciated.
Yeah, thank you so much. This was great.
All right, Junkies, thanks for listening to this episode with Adrian Ballinger. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Now, if you like these little interviews and don't want to miss any future episodes, please head over to iTunes or Stitcher and simply subscribe to the show. I would also like to take the opportunity to thank everyone who has left a rating and a review there. It's much appreciated. And if you haven't done so yet, please consider leaving me one, as it will definitely help to grow the show even further. Now, we're also on Spotify, so if that's your preferred medium, just search for Endurance Junkie Podcast in the search bar, and you will find me no problem. Right, thanks again for listening, and I hope you'll join me next time. Cheers.